Hey guys, this is Matt from Amateur Filmies and welcome to a brand new video where we'll be going through our Blue Underground collection. They're a really great company. We wanted to show off what we had to you guys, so we hope you enjoy. So Blue Underground is another movie distributor company based in the US, and I would say that they specialize basically in cult horror films, like a lot of these other companies that we collect do. They have a really cool catalogue, so if you're into cult or underground horror movies, they're a great company to check out, and their editions are generally very, very good as well. So the first movie we have here is Michelle Soavi's Stage Fright. So a couple of videos ago we did an overview of our Shameless Films collection, and in our collection in that video we showed off a couple of Michelle Soavi films like The Church, The Sect, and Cemetery Man, and a lot of you guys in the comment section actually said that I should really check out Stage Fright at some point, so I ended up tracking it down, buying it, and watching it, and I have to say I totally agree with everyone who said I should watch this one because I really ended up enjoying it a lot. If I'm remembering correctly, this is actually Michelle Soavi's feature film debut, and what a strong effort for a feature film debut, I have to say. Basically, if you're not really sure about the movie, it's about a group of theatre actors who are practicing for a production that they're about to debut in like a couple of weeks' time or something like that. And anyway, some stuff happens and they end up getting locked inside the theatre overnight, but unbeknownst to them, they also got locked in with a crazed killer that starts hunting them down one by one. So the film came out in 1987, and a really cool random fact about it as well is it's actually co-written by George Eastman, who the name might ring a few bells for some of you guys watching, but basically he is known for being in a lot of famous Italian horror productions, and he's also an actor as well, and he's probably most known for his work as the creature from Anthropophagus and Absurd. So I thought that was pretty cool that he actually co-wrote this one. There are a lot of unique aspects to this film, probably most notably was the set location. As I said, it's set in a theatre that they get locked in overnight, and just that sort of, the big stage, the auditorium, and sort of the backstage areas really was a really cool location for this type of horror movie. So they had the opportunity to come up with a lot of is kills and horror sequences, which is awesome. And without spoiling too much as well, the killer in this, he dons a particular costume which is part creepy but also part funny. It's unintentionally funny in a way, I think. But I would say though that similar to figures like Jason or other masked killers that I'm blanking on, like Michael Myers, you always remember what they look like. And I have to say, after watching this one, despite it sort of being a half funny choice for a costume, I definitely won't forget what the killer looks like in this one. Overall, this is a really strong slasher film with decent acting and a lot of memorable sequences. I would say in consideration of all the other Michelle Soavi films that I've watched, this is probably my second favorite. I think Cemetery Man still tops out at number one for me. If you're into, Italian, slasher or giallo productions, this one won't let you down. And thank you, everyone who recommended this film to me in the comments of the previous video and said that I should make this a priority because I definitely 100% enjoyed it. This next one gets my personal award for best movie title, and that is Amsterdam. Apart from the title, this one actually caught my attention because I knew that it was a European slasher, and I really liked the concepts behind it as well, which is basically that, yeah, it is a basic, killer hunting people movie, but I liked the idea that it was about a killer who was using the canals of Amsterdam to sort of find his victims. Similar to what I said with Stage Fright, I was hoping that they would use this location to set up some really cool kills, and they definitely did do that at certain points. My favourite was probably the first kill, actually, which involves the bridge and the boat full of people going underneath the bridge, which obviously I won't show clips of, but I think it really set the tone of the movie quite well. So the main character's name is Eric, and he's a police officer, and the film bounces between his perspective as he investigates the crime and the killer's perspective as he commits the crime. And again, I just want to repeat something that I did say while I was talking about Stage Fright. I really like when a horror movie can come up with a unique look for its killer, and that's definitely the case in this movie, where the killer dons a scuba outfit, which I thought was really cool as well. While I certainly enjoyed my time with this movie and would definitely recommend giving it a go, there were a couple of quick elements I wanted to discuss. For one, I felt like the movie was trying to do a lot of stuff at once. Like, for example, the investigation that's being undertaken feels very ham-fisted, and it feels like they go about things very quickly. And there's also a romantic pursuit between the main character and a woman that he meets, and it just felt really unnecessary. There were a lot of scenes dedicated to developing that relationship, but it felt sort of inconsequential to the plot anyway. I felt like it probably could have been avoided, and they could have focused on having a more interesting investigation. And speaking of wanting a more interesting investigation, if I'm remembering correctly, there are at least 1 or 2 scenes in the movie where instead of like, having him find a really cool clue and deducting like, certain information in a really like suspenseful way, he just gets a phone call from some random dude telling him what he needs to know and where to go, and just that's how they accelerate the investigation. Like, they make a point of saying that he's like one of the best detectives that they have, but it felt like at least a couple of times just some faceless character would just tell him everything that he needed to know, and he didn't really have to do much work at all. Another small pet peeve I had with this movie was I feel like it didn't set up enough characters as potential suspects. I feel like, when you watch a slasher movie with a masked killer or whatever, part of the fun is trying to guess who it might be and what their motive might be, but I feel like they didn't really give us that opportunity just because there weren't enough people that they introduced, if that makes sense. Also, this might not necessarily be a negative thing, but I did want to talk about it, was that the last act in the film, it feels like it transitions from a horror thriller type of movie to a more high-octane action film, most notably with the really, really exceptionally long speedboat chase scene. They definitely like hammed it up. It went for quite a while. It was almost funny actually how long it went for, but it was still cool regardless. It might seem like a really weird thing to like just point out in this video, but I did want to say that for people who are going into it thinking that it was going to be like a straight up horror film, I think a more accurate description would probably be that it's more of a thriller action that has a couple of horror scenes in it. As I said before, I do recommend checking it out. Despite some of the things that I mentioned earlier, I still do think it is quite an enjoyable movie. I just think it could have been improved with some minor tweaks, that's all. These next 2 releases go hand in hand, so I'll talk about them at the same time. The first one here is Maniac Cop 2. And Maniac Cop 3. So I watched the first Maniac Cop maybe about a year and a half ago now, and I thought it was pretty decent. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, I thought it was okay. But I did see a lot of YouTube videos and like comments on videos discussing the sequels of these films, so I thought it wouldn't hurt to check them out, given that I didn't mind watching the first one, so it'd be cool to see how they approach the second and third one. Cool fact about these movies, which I'm sure a lot of you probably already know, is that this is directed by a man named William Lustig, who is actually the CEO of Blue Underground, so makes sense that his movies are released by his company, but I thought that was really cool that not only did he direct these movies, but he actually owns the company that put these releases out. Full disclosure as well, I haven't actually checked out Maniac Cop 3 yet, but I wanted to say, while admittedly I'm a little bit fuzzy on the details of the first movie, just because it has been a while since I've watched it and I've only seen it the once, I think I can definitively say that I did prefer Maniac Cop 2, although I think it is a case more where like, I think the first Maniac Cop is a better made film, but the Maniac Cop 2 is a lot more fun. The sequel definitely felt a lot more campy, and they definitely spent a lot of time sort of delving into the more supernatural elements of the killer in the sequel. The first one felt a lot more reserved as far as its kills and stuff. Like, there was a lot of cool stunt work, but it didn't feel like, that intense of a slasher movie, but this one just felt like it went balls to the wall with all the kills in it. In particular, there's like a really hilarious scene where the Maniac Cop handcuffs one of the main characters to a steering wheel of a car and then sort of just pushes the car down like a hill of busy traffic, and it's just one of the most absurd scenes I've seen in a while. It's just absolutely ridiculous and over the top, and just like the amount of like momentum this car gets before crashing, and it's just absolutely silly. And the last sequence where he's in the prison and he gets set on fire and it's just like going ham on all the prisoners, I pissed myself laughing. It was awesome, but just so ridiculous. Part of the story that I actually quite liked but didn't expect was that they gave the Maniac Cop a type of friend in the form of another criminal who sort of assists him in doing some, criminal activities. And I thought that was a really interesting way to sort of spice up the story from the first one, because you sort of think of the Maniac Cop as being more of a lone wolf type of character. So I thought that sort of dynamic that they explored in the second one was, a fresh take. Overall, I think Maniac Cop 2 is definitely a decent follow-up from the first one. And while I'm not like a super fan of these movies so far, I do like them enough that I'm obviously very keen to check out the third one, which is why I own it. But yeah, I can also really see why other horror fans like these as well. If you've seen Maniac Cop 3 in particular, let me know how it goes up against the first and second one, because I hopefully will be watching this one soon. But as always, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it as well. This next release is a double pack, and I have to say straight off the bat, I actually don't have much to say about this one just because I haven't watched these yet, as you can tell in a second because it is still sealed. This is a double feature. It says Code 7 Victim 5 and Mozambique. I don't even know how to say that word, I apologize. As we've expressed in the past few recent videos, we've slowly been acquiring the collection of another collector, and this was one of the ones that was in the initial bundles that we bought, so we don't really know a whole lot about these. They seem to be just sort of generic action-adventure movies from the 60s, so if you know anything about these movies and whether or not they're any good or not, let us know. But yeah, I don't know when we'll get to this, but I guess it's good to have in the Blue Underground collection, so we'll see. This next film was released in 1981, and that is Venom. I can assure you this is not related to the Marvel character. So this movie is basically about a few criminals who were in the process of kidnapping the son of a rich family, but subsequently get trapped in their house with a deadly snake. So this movie actually has quite a few veteran actors in it. It's got Sterling Hayden, who you guys probably know from Doctor Strangelove. It's also got Oliver Reed, who's always good to watch on screen, and it's even got Klaus Kinski in it too. This movie was definitely not what I was expecting it to be, which was a killer animal movie. I think the movie itself is pretty serviceable. The acting in it is definitely the best part of the movie, understandably, given that, you know, as I said, there are some veteran actors in there who are really, really talented. I think it's the case, though, that if this production didn't have access to those famous actors, this would be a very forgettable movie indeed. There are just like so many scenes where just not much is happening. There's like a lot of repetition where, you know, as I said, they're trapped in the house and there's police trying to negotiate with them from the streets. It felt like the same scene kept happening over and over again in a lot of ways, so that was kind of annoying. I think the most annoying thing about this movie is that the snake in it didn't really end up doing much at all and just felt like that they were trying to search for a way to add a type of gimmick to the movie. Like, bar one scene towards the start when you first get introduced to the snake, it really doesn't actually do that much from that point onwards. It felt really inconsequential to the plot. It's worth mentioning as well that this film is technically categorized as a horror film, but I don't personally see it as one at all. I think it's just more of a generic thriller, like type of hostage movie. To be fair, it's probably my fault for not reading into the movie much before giving it a go, but like when you see cover art like that with a giant snake, you sort of expect it to be, you know, a lot more interesting, and you expect the snake to be, you know, the main focus of the movie, but that really wasn't the case. In fact, it's not a giant snake at all. It's just a regular sized black mamba snake, like the one in Kill Bill, I believe. And yeah, look, I guess, as I said, that's probably on me for not reading more about the movie, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed. I personally would give this movie a miss if you haven't seen it yet. It's not a terrible movie. It's pretty watchable, but it's just not memorable in the slightest. So if you're on the fence about buying it, maybe see if you can stream it first to see if it sort of, you know, meets your expectations or whatever, but yeah, not the best. This next movie is The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, also known as Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. Now this one is actually a really cool zombie film. I do apologize in advance, so it has been quite a long time since I've watched this one, so I'm a little bit fuzzy on the specifics. I did want to rewatch this one before filming this video, but I didn't get the time, but it is a really good zombie movie. I remember actually Sarah brought this one to my attention because she sort of sometimes goes through those zombie kicks where she just wants to watch as many zombie movies as she can. And she was like researching cool new zombie movies to check out, and this one got recommended. So we bought it on eBay, and when we finally watched it, we 100% weren't disappointed. It's actually a really good movie. And I really also liked the countryside where this was shot. Like they showed off like a lot of beautiful landscapes that just looked visually stunning. I really liked that new setting, like that countryside setting. You don't really see that too often with zombie type movies, at least from this era. In zombie movies and infection movies, sometimes the filmmakers want to come up with a reason to explain why the outbreak is happening. And while that isn't always necessary for a movie, I think it is sometimes cool to see what they can come up with as an explanation. And I do like the one that they come up with in this movie. Obviously, I won't give it away. I'll let you guys find out for yourself. But I thought it was like a fun, sort of unique way to explain why this sort of zombie outbreak was happening. I think this is an excellent zombie movie for the time that it came out. I'm not sure if I already mentioned it, but it came out in 1974. And I feel like if you haven't watched it, or, you know, you've been wanting to watch some older zombie movies, I think this is a great example of what they were able to do in the 70s. And considering that Night of the Living Dead came out in 1968, I think it was really cool to see what direction some filmmakers were taking with the zombie genre, as this, as I said, only came out 6 years after Night of the Living Dead. So I think this is an essential watch if you're a fan of zombie movies, and yeah, it's just a really good one. Next up, we have the film Manhattan Baby, directed by Lucio Fulci. So this film came out in 1982, and I have talked about this on the channel before, but this is the time period where people tend to argue that Lucio Fulci's films started to take a little bit of a dip in quality, and I can see why they might say that after watching this film. He's the type of filmmaker where even if he does a really bad movie, I'm usually going to find something that I like in it. I think it's just because I think he's a really interesting filmmaker, both visually and also in the way he tells a story, because sometimes when he tells stories, they're completely incoherent, and I find that interesting in and of itself. And in saying that, the story in this one is quite incoherent as well, but there were still some elements to this movie that I did enjoy, although admittedly, of the Fulci films that I have seen, I would say this ranks a little bit more towards the bottom. I know I've talked about settings a lot in this video. It just seems that all these movies have picked really cool locations, but I like how this movie bounces between New York and the Egyptian setting as well, where basically at the start of the movie you find that the main character is exploring an Egyptian tomb and inadvertently activates a type of curse that affects him and his family. And while the story doesn't really make too much sense, I think you can still follow along close enough to know what's happening. But yeah, like, you just have to sort of accept that when you're watching some Fulci films and, you know, sometimes other Italian horror productions as well, that story isn't necessarily their main priority, I guess you could say. In some ways, it did have a similar vibe to the previous Gates of Hell movies. It's just not really as good as those movies, unfortunately. And I think one thing that I always enjoy watching with, you know, because a lot of these movies are dubbed in English, obviously. The boy in this, who I believe is also the kid in House by the Cemetery, his dialogue is so bad in this movie. It's like, the dubbing is laughably bad, but again, to some people, me included, that can add an aspect of fun to the movie, to watch, you know, dubbed movies that are unintentionally hilarious. As far as whether or not I would recommend you watch this movie, I would say, as I've said in the past regarding other Fulci films like Cat in the Brain, that if you like Lucio Fulci and you know what to expect from his films, then I would say give this one a try. Maybe you'll like it a little bit more than I did, but there are definitely things in this that you can just tell are like textbook Fulci. But it's definitely not one that I would prioritize if you're just trying to get into, like, you know, general Italian horror. It's definitely not up there as being a good one. So yeah, as I said, recommended for Fulci fans, but not really anyone else. We have one more to show today, and that is Gary Sherman's Dead and Buried. So similar to The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, this was a sort of low-key zombie movie that I had heard was pretty good from the reviews that I'd read online. So Sarah and I were really keen to watch this one. This movie had like a lot of really cool concepts, and it had set like a really interesting mood and tone as well. I really liked the flash photography element as well. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about, but I really sort of thought that was a really interesting way to sort of enhance that sort of mystery and, you know, dread that I was definitely feeling for a lot of this movie. I know that's a very specific reference to make with this movie, and that's probably not helpful to people who haven't watched it before, but I will say that, like, they do a really good job of adding to like the mystique feeling of this movie. It's not a traditional zombie movie in that, you know, it's zombies just start to rise and start attacking. There's actually a degree of, like, as I said, keep saying, mystery to the film. You don't actually know why certain things are happening, and there is some fun to be had in trying to figure out like why this is happening and what is going on. And I thought that was actually utilized really, really well as far as the writing goes. Interesting fact about this movie is that it was actually co-written by Dan O'Bannon, who I'm sure a lot of you guys know from his work on the original Alien and, of course, Return of the Living Dead. It's cool to see his name attached to this, and you can definitely see his influence on it as far as how strong the writing is, which I think it is a pretty well-written film. The acting as well is actually quite good. The guy who plays Grandpa Joe from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is actually in this. I think his name's Jack Albertson, and I know it's like really random to point out, but I don't think I've seen him in anything else except Willy Wonka and this movie, which is definitely the genres of both of those movies are definitely very far apart from each other. But yeah, overall a very, very decent zombie movie. Not, as I said before, not a conventional type of movie. The ending, while I definitely did really like the ending, I think it is a case of like, the more you think about it and sort of try and figure out the logistics of what they were trying to accomplish, the less sense it makes. But, you know, if you don't overthink it and just sort of take it for what it is, I think it is a really cool ending to a really suspenseful movie. So, highly recommended. So that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching our overview of this collection. I definitely recommend checking out their catalog if you are into these type of movies. They do have a pretty cool selection. If you have any recommendations based on the films that we've shown here today, or even like recommendations for specific Blue Underground releases, definitely let us know, because as is very evident right now, we don't have too many of them. So if you think there are specific ones we should look into, definitely tell us. Cheers for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.